And it works. Hello everybody, and how are you all? Welcome to my space where you can listen to stories being read. I'm just quickly going to have a snack on my banana because I didn't actually get enough time to do that before. I was trying to, but I got sidetracked with trying to get a photo to put up on Instagram to say I was getting ready, as you do. So here we go. I've got the camera working. I've got the green screen working. It's not too sparkly around the edges. I've got the title of the book up there for you if you're watching this on Twitch, and a picture of the book over there. And you've got the chat area. This is all the Twitch layout, obviously. And if you're over on YouTube, well, actually, I'll probably have cropped all that out, but that's all right because you can chat underneath the video on YouTube. So we are going to be reading today from A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. And a lot of people have watched the movies, the old movies of this story. Not everybody's actually read it, but that's all right. So where did we get up to? We got up to the end of chapter 5, I think it was called. I'll just look at the title of it just to make sure. Chapter 5 was Becky. Remember, I think Becky was the little girl who worked there. And we are now going to be reading chapter 6, which is called The Diamond Mines. Now, just in case you're not sure, if you are a member of Twitch, which doesn't cost you anything to do, then you can follow me, which means that you can then chat in the chat stream over there. If you're not following me, you can't chat, I'm sorry. Not here. You can chat over on YouTube. So here we go, same idea over there, but you have to be a member of YouTube to chat. So chapter 6 of A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett, called The Diamond Mines. Not very long after this, a very exciting thing happened. Not only Sarah, but the entire school found it exciting and made it the chief subject of conversation for weeks after it occurred. In one of his letters, Captain Crewe told a most interesting story. A friend who had been at school with him when he was a boy had unexpectedly come to see him in India. He was the owner of a large tract of land upon which diamonds had been found, and he was engaged in developing the mines. If all went as was confidently expected, he would become possessed of such wealth as it made one dizzy to think of, and because he was fond of the friend of his school days, he had given him an opportunity to share in the enormous fortune by becoming a partner in his scheme. This at least was what Sarah gathered from his letters. It is true that any other business scheme, however magnificent, would have had but small attraction for her or for the schoolroom, but diamond mines sounded so like the Arabian Nights that no one could be indifferent. Sarah thought them enchanting, and painted pictures for Ermengarde and Lottie of the labyrinthine passages in the bowels of the earth, where sparkling stones studded the walls and roofs and ceilings, and strange dark men dug them out with heavy picks. Ermengarde delighted in the story, and Lottie insisted on its being retold to her every evening. Lavinia was very spiteful about it, and told Jessie that she didn't believe in such things as diamond mines existed. My mamma has a diamond ring which cost £40, she said, and it is not a big one either. If there were mines full of diamonds, people would be so rich it would be ridiculous. Perhaps Sarah will be so rich that she will be ridiculous, giggled Jessie. She's ridiculous without being rich, Lavinia sniffed. I believe you hate her, said Jessie. No, I don't, snapped Lavinia, but I don't believe in mines full of diamonds. Well, people have to get them from somewhere, said Jessie. Lavinia, with a new giggle, what do you think Gertrude says? I don't know, I'm sure, and I don't care if it's something more about that everlasting Sarah. Well, it is. One of her pretends is that she is a princess. She plays it all the time, even in school. She says it makes her learn her lessons better. She wants Ermengarde to be one too, but Ermengarde says she's too fat. She is too fat, said Lavinia, and Sarah is too thin. Naturally, Jessie giggled again. She says it's nothing to do with what you look like or what you have. It's only to do with what you think of and what you do. I suppose she thinks she could be a princess if she were a beggar, said Lavinia. Let us begin to call her Your Royal Highness. Lessons for the day were over, and they were sitting before the schoolroom fire enjoying the time they liked best. It was the time when Miss Minchin and Miss Amelia were taking their tea in the sitting room sacred to themselves. At this hour a great deal of talking was done, and a great many secrets changed hands, particularly if the younger pupils behaved themselves well and did not squabble or run about noisily, which it must be confessed they usually did. When they made an uproar, the older girls usually interfered with scoldings and shakes. They were expected to keep order, and there was danger that if they did not, Miss Minchin or Miss Amelia would appear and put an end to the festivities. Even as Lavinia spoke, the door opened, and Sarah entered with Lottie, whose habit was to trot everywhere after her, like a little dog. "There she is with that horrid child," exclaimed Lavinia in a whisper. "If she's so fond of her, why doesn't she keep her in her own room? She will begin howling about something in 5 minutes." It happened that Lottie had been seized with a sudden desire to play in the schoolroom, and she had begged her adopted parent to come with her. She joined a little group. Hang on, I'm just trying to get this to open in the other screen. Hurry up. Anyway, she joined a group of little ones who were playing in a corner. Sarah curled herself up in the window seat, opened a book and began to read. It was a book about the French Revolution, and she was soon lost in a harrowing picture of the prisoners in the Bastille, men who had spent so many years in dungeons that they were dragged out by those who rescued them. Their long grey hair and beards almost hid their faces, and they had forgotten that an outside world existed at all, and were like beings in a dream. She was so far away from the schoolroom, in her imagination, that it was not agreeable to be dragged back suddenly by a howl from Lottie. Never did she find anything so difficult as to keep herself from losing her temper when she was suddenly disturbed while absorbed in a book. People who are fond of books know the feeling of irritation which sweeps over them at such a moment. The temptation to be unreasonable and snappish is one not easy to manage. "It makes me feel as if someone had hit me," Sarah had told Ermengarde once in confidence, and as if I want to hit back. I have to remember things quickly to keep from saying something ill-tempered. She had to remember things quickly when she laid her book on the window seat and jumped down from her comfortable corner. Lottie had been sliding across the schoolroom floor, and having first irritated Lavinia and Jessie by making a noise, had ended by falling down and hurting her fat knee. She was screaming and dancing up and down in the midst of a group of friends and enemies who were alternately coaxing and scolding her. "Stop this minute, you crybaby! Stop this minute!" Lavinia commanded. "I'm not a crybaby! I'm not!" wailed Lottie. "Sarah! Sarah!" "If she doesn't stop, Miss Minchin will hear her," cried Jessie. "Lottie, darling, I'll give you a penny." I don't want your penny," sobbed Lottie, and she looked down at the fat knee and, seeing a drop of blood on it, burst forth again. Sarah flew across the room and, kneeling down, put her arms round her. "Now, Lottie," she said, "now, Lottie, you promised Sarah." "She said I was a crybaby," wept Lottie. Sarah patted her, but spoke in the steady voice Lottie knew. "But if you cry, you will be one, Lottie, pet. You promised." Lottie remembered that she had promised, but she preferred to lift up her voice. "I haven't any mamma," she proclaimed. "I haven't a bit of mamma." "Yes, you have," said Sarah cheerfully. "Have you forgotten? Don't you know that Sarah is your mamma? Don't you want Sarah for your mamma?" Lottie cuddled up to her with a consoled sniff. "Come and sit in the window seat with me," Sarah went on, "and I'll whisper a story to you." "Will you?" whimpered Lottie. "Will you tell me about the diamond mines?" "The diamond mines?" broke out Lavinia. "Nasty little spoiled thing. I should like to slap her." Sarah got up quickly on her feet. It must be remembered that she had been very deeply absorbed in the book about the Bastille, and she had had to recall several things rapidly when she realized that she must go and take care of her adopted child. She was not an angel, and she was not fond of Lavinia. "Well," she said with some fire, "I should like to slap you, but I don't want to slap you," restraining herself. "At least, I both want to slap you and I should like to slap you, but I won't slap you. We are not little gutter children. We are both old enough to know better." Here was Lavinia's opportunity. "Ah, yes, your Royal Highness," she said. "We are princesses, I believe. At least one of us is. The school ought to be very fashionable now. Miss Minchin has a princess for a pupil." Sarah started toward her. She looked as if she were going to box her ears. Perhaps she was. Her trick of pretending things was the joy of her life. She never spoke of it to girls she was not fond of. Her new pretend about being a princess was very near to her heart, and she was shy and sensitive about it. She had meant it to be rather a secret, and here was Lavinia deriding it before nearly all the school. She felt the blood rush up into her face and tingle in her ears. She only just saved herself. If you were a princess, you did not fly into rages. Her hand dropped, and she stood quite still for a moment. When she spoke, it was in a quiet, steady voice. She held her head up, and everybody listened to her. "It is true," she said. "Sometimes I do pretend I am a princess. I pretend I am a princess so that I can try and behave like one." Lavinia could not think of exactly the right thing to say. Several times she had found that she could not think of a satisfactory reply when she was dealing with Sarah. The reason of this was that somehow the rest always seemed to be vaguely in sympathy with her opponent. She saw now that they were pricking up their ears interestedly. The truth was they liked princesses, and they all hoped they might hear something more definite about this one, and drew nearer Sarah accordingly. Lavinia could only invent one remark, and it fell rather flat. "Dear me," she said, "I hope when you ascend the throne you won't forget us." "I won't," said Sarah, and she did not utter another word, but stood quite still and stared at her steadily as she saw her take Jessie's arm and turn away. After this, the girls who were jealous of her used to speak of her as Princess Sarah, whenever they wished to be particularly disdainful, and those who were fond of her gave her the name among themselves as a term of affection. No one called her Princess instead of Sarah, but her adorers were much pleased with the picturesqueness and grandeur of the title, and Miss Minchin, hearing of it, mentioned it more than once to visiting parents, feeling it rather suggested a sort of royal boarding school. To Becky it seemed the most appropriate thing in the world. The acquaintance begun on the foggy afternoon when she had jumped up terrified from her sleep in the comfortable chair, had ripened and grown, though it must be confessed that Miss Minchin and Miss Amelia knew very little about it. They were aware that Sarah was kind to the scullery maid, but they knew nothing of certain delightful moments, snatched perilously when the upstairs rooms being set in order with lightning rapidity, Sarah's sitting room was reached, and the heavy coal box set down with a sigh of joy. At such times were told by instalments things of a satisfying nature were either produced, such times stories were told, things of a satisfying nature were either produced and eaten or hastily tucked into pockets to be disposed of at night, when Becky went upstairs to her attic to bed. "But I has to eat 'em careful, miss," she said once, "'cause if I leave crumbs the rats come out to get 'em." "Rats!" exclaimed Sarah in horror. "Are there rats there?" "Lots of 'em, miss," Becky answered in quite a matter-of-fact manner. "There's mostly is rats and mice in the attics. You gets used to the noise they make scuttling about. I've got so I don't mind 'em so long as they don't run over me pillar." "Ugh!" said Sarah. "You get used to anything after a bit," said Becky. "You have to, miss, if you're born a scullery maid. I'd rather have rats than cockroaches." "So would I," said Sarah. "I suppose you might make friends with a rat in time, but I don't believe I should like to make friends with a cockroach." Sometimes Becky did not dare to spend more than a few minutes in the bright, warm room, and when this was the case, perhaps only a few words could be exchanged, and a small purchase slipped into the old-fashioned pocket Becky carried under her dress skirt, tied around her waist with a band of tape. Pockets didn't used to be sewn into your clothing. They used to be a little bag with a piece of cord that you then tied around yourself. So that's what they're talking about here. The search for and discovery of satisfying things to eat which could be packed into small space, added a new interest to Sarah's existence. When she drove or walked out, she used to look into shop windows eagerly. The first time it occurred to her to bring home 2 or 3 little meat pies, she felt that she had hit upon a discovery. When she exhibited them, Becky's eyes quite sparkled. "Oh, miss," she murmured, "them will be nice and filling. It's fillingness that's the best. Sponge cakes are evingly thing. Sponge cakes an evingly thing, but it melts away like, if you understand, miss. These'll just stay in your stomach." Evingly, heavenly. "Well," hesitated Sarah, "I don't think it would be good if they stayed always, but I do believe they will be satisfying." They were satisfying, and so were beef sandwiches bought at a cook shop, and so were rolls and bologna sausage. In time, Becky began to lose her hungry, tired feeling, and the coal box did not seem so unbearably heavy. However heavy it was, and whatsoever the temper of the cook and the hardness of the work heaped upon her shoulders, she had always the chance of the afternoon to look forward to, the chance that Miss Sarah would be able to be in her sitting room. In fact, the mere seeing of Miss Sarah would have been enough without meat pies. If there were time only for a few words, they were always friendly, merry words that put heart into one, and if there were time for more, then there was an instalment of a story to be told, or some other thing one remembered afterward, and sometimes lay awake in one's bed in the attic to think over. Sarah, who was only doing what she unconsciously liked better than anything else, nature having made her for a giver, had not the least idea what she meant to poor Becky, and how wonderful a benefactor she seemed. If nature has made you a giver, your hands are borne open, and so is your heart, and though there may be times when your hands are empty, your heart is always full, and you can give things out of that, warm things, kind things, sweet things, help and comfort and laughter, and sometimes gay, kind laughter is the best help of all. Becky had scarcely known what laughter was through all her poor little hard-driven life. Sarah made her laugh and laughed with her, and though neither of them quite knew it, the laughter was as fillin' as the meat pies. A few weeks before Sarah's 11th birthday, a letter came to her from her father, which did not seem to be written in such boyish high spirits as usual. He was not very well, and was evidently overweighted by the business connected with the diamond mines. "You see, little Sarah," he wrote, "your daddy is not a businessman at all, and figures and documents bother him. He does not really understand them, and all this seems so enormous. Perhaps, if I was not feverish, I should not be awake tossing about one half of the night, and spend the other half in troublesome dreams. If my little missus were here, I dare say she would give me some solemn good advice. You would, wouldn't you, little miss?" One of his many jokes had been to call her his little missus, because she had such an old-fashioned air. He had made wonderful preparations for her birthday. Among other things, a new doll had been ordered in Paris, and her wardrobe was to be indeed a marvel of splendid perfection. When she had replied to the letter asking her if the doll would be an acceptable present, Sarah had been very quaint. "I am getting very old," she wrote. "You see, I shall never live to have another doll given to me. This will be my last doll. There is something solemn about it. If I could write poetry, I am sure a poem about a last doll would be very nice, but I cannot write poetry. I have tried, and it made me laugh. It did not sound like Watts or Coleridge or Shakespeare at all. No one could ever take Emily's place, but I should respect the last doll very much, and I'm sure the school would love it. They all like dolls, though some of the big ones, the almost 15 ones, pretend they are too grown up." Captain Crewe had a splitting headache when he read this letter in his bungalow in India. The table before him was heaped with papers and letters, which were alarming him and filling him with anxious dread, but he laughed as he had not laughed for weeks. "Oh," he said, "she's better fun every year she lives. God grant this business may right itself and leave me free to run home and see her. What shouldn't I give to have her little arms round my neck this minute? What wouldn't I give?" The birthday was celebrated by great festivities. The schoolroom was to be decorated and there was to be a party. The boxes containing the presents were to be opened with great ceremony, and there was to be a glittering feast spread in Miss Minchin's sacred room. When the day arrived, the whole house was in a whirl of excitement. How the morning passed nobody quite knew, because there seemed such preparations to be made. The schoolroom was being decked with garlands of holly, the desks had been moved away, and red covers had been put on the forms which were arrayed around the room against the wall. Forms are like long bench seats that you sit on. When Sarah went into her sitting room in the morning, she found on the table a small dumpy package tied up in a piece of brown paper. She knew it was a present, and she thought she could guess whom it came from. She opened it quite tenderly. It was a square pincushion, made of not quite clean red flannel, and black pins had been stuck carefully into it to form the words "Many Happy Returns," spelled MENNY, and then returns is spelt normally. So someone who's not used to writing lots of words. "Oh," cried Sarah with a warm feeling in her heart, "what pains she has taken. I like it so. It makes me feel sorrowful." But in the next moment she was mystified. On the underside of the pincushion was secured a card, bearing in neat letters the name Miss Amelia Minchin. Sarah turned it over and over. "Miss Amelia," she said to herself, "how can it be?" And just at that very moment she heard the door being cautiously pushed open and saw Becky peeking around it. There was an affectionate, happy grin on her face, and she shuffled forward and stood nervously pulling at her fingers. "Do you like it, Miss Sarah?" she said. "Do you?" "Like it?" cried Sarah. "You darling Becky, you made it all yourself." Becky gave a hysteric but joyful sniff, and her eyes looked quite moist with delight. "It ain't nothing but flanning, and the flanning ain't new, but I wanted to give you something, and I made it of nights. I knew you could pretend it was satin with diamond pins in it. I tried to when I was making it." "The card, miss," rather doubtfully. "'Twarn't wrong of me to pick it up out of the dustbin, was it? Miss Melia had throwed it away. I had no card of my own, and I knowed it wouldn't be a proper present if it didn't pin a card on, so I pinned Miss Melia's." Sarah flew at her and hugged her. She could not have told herself or anyone else why. There was a lump in her throat. "Oh, Becky," she cried out with a queer little laugh. "I love you, Becky. I do, I do." "Oh, miss," breathed Becky. "Thank you, miss. Kindly. It ain't good enough for that. The flanning wasn't new." Flanning. Flannel. Winceyette. That brushed woven cotton fabric that was used for warm underclothing and things like that. There you go. And that's the end of that chapter. The next chapter is chapter 7, the diamond mines again. And I am going to have a drink of water and maybe a bite of my banana because I need it. And I hope you remembered your water. And I'll see if I can adjust this camera so it looks a little bit better. It's still a bit dark, isn't it? Getting there. It's a little bit better, isn't it? Let's go for one more. That looks a bit better to me. I hope that works better for you. And I shall have one more mouthful of my water. Did you remember yours? Have you been snacking away and eating and drinking while you're listening to your story, or you just snugged up in bed in your blanket, all nice and cozy? Or if you're starting to get in towards summer, maybe you're lying there with the fan going and the windows open so you don't get too hot. Because I'm in New Zealand and we're in winter, but some of you aren't in New Zealand. You're in other parts of the world, like Canada or America or France or whatever. Maybe you could write where you come from, just the country. You don't need to give more detail than that in the chat, so that others can see how widespread we are. It's lovely to be able to listen to and talk to and engage with other people from different parts of the world, all over the world. So here we go. Chapter 7 of A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Chapter 7 is called The Diamond Mines Again. So here we go. When Sarah entered the holly-hung schoolroom in the afternoon, she did so as the head of a sort of procession. Miss Minchin, in her grandest silk dress, led her by the hand. A manservant followed, carrying the box containing the last doll. A housemaid carried a second box, and Becky brought up the rear carrying a third and wearing a clean apron and a new cap. Sarah would have much preferred to enter in the usual way, but Miss Minchin had sent for her, and after an interview in her private sitting room had expressed her wishes. "This is not an ordinary occasion," she said. "I do not desire that it should be treated as one." So Sarah was led grandly in and felt shy when, on her entry, the big girls stared at her and touched each other's elbows, and the little ones began to squirm joyously in their seats. "Silence, young ladies," said Miss Minchin at the murmur which arose. "James, place the box on the table and remove the lid. Emma, put yours upon a chair. Becky," suddenly and severely. Becky had quite forgotten herself in her excitement and was grinning at Lottie, who was wriggling with rapturous expectation. She almost dropped her box. The disapproving voice so startled her, and her frightened bobbing curtsy of apology was so funny that Lavinia and Jessie tittered. "It is not your place to look at the young ladies," said Miss Minchin. "You forget yourself. Put your box down." Becky obeyed with alarmed haste and hastily backed toward the door. "You may leave us," Miss Minchin announced to the servants with a wave of her hand. Becky stepped aside respectfully to allow the superior servants to pass out first. She could not help casting a longing glance at the box on the table. Something made of blue satin was peeping from between the folds of tissue paper. "If you please, Miss Minchin," said Sarah suddenly, "mayn't Becky stay?" It was a bold thing to do. Miss Minchin was betrayed into something like a slight jump. Then she put her eyeglass up, holding eyeglasses on a handle, not wearing them like this, and gazed at her show pupil disturbedly. She was a little bit put out by the fact that she was asking that the servant would stay in the room. "Becky," she exclaimed, "my dearest Sarah." Sarah advanced a step toward her. "I want her because I know she will like to see the presents," she explained. "She is a little girl too, you know." Miss Minchin was scandalized. She glanced from one figure to the other. "My dear Sarah," she said, "Becky is the scullery maid. Scullery maids are not little girls." It really had not occurred to her to think of them in that light. Scullery maids were machines who carried coal scuttles and made fires. "But Becky is," said Sarah, "and I know she would enjoy herself. Please let her stay, because it is my birthday." Miss Minchin replied with much dignity, "As you ask it for a birthday favour, she may stay. Rebecca, thank Miss Sarah for her kindness." Becky had been backing into the corner, twisting the hem of her apron in delighted suspense. She came forward, bobbing curtsies. But between Sarah's eyes and her own there passed a gleam of friendly understanding, while her words tumbled over each other. "Oh, if you please, miss, I'm that grateful, miss. I did want to see the doll, miss, that I did. Thank you, miss, and thank you, ma'am," turning and making an alarmed bob to Miss Minchin, "for letting me take the liberty." Miss Minchin waved her hand again. This time it was in the direction of the corner near the door. "Go and stand there," she commanded, "not too near the young ladies." Becky went to her place, grinning. She did not care where she was sent, so that she might have the luck of being inside the room, instead of being downstairs in the scullery while these delights were going on. She did not even mind when Miss Minchin cleared her throat ominously and spoke again. "Now, young ladies, I have a few words to say to you," she announced. "She's going to make a speech," whispered one of the girls. "I wish it was over." Sarah felt rather uncomfortable. As this was her party, it was probable that the speech was about her. It is not agreeable to stand in a schoolroom and have a speech made about you. "You are aware, young ladies," the speech began, for it was a speech, "that dear Sarah is 11 years old today." "Dear Sarah," murmured Lavinia. "Several of you have also been 11 years old, but Sarah's birthdays are rather different from other little girls' birthdays. When she is older, she will be heiress to a large fortune, which it will be her duty to spend in a meritorious manner." "The diamond mines," giggled Jessie in a whisper. Sarah did not hear her, but as she stood with her green-grey eyes fixed steadily on Miss Minchin, she felt herself growing rather hot. When Miss Minchin talked about money, she felt somehow that she always hated her, and of course it was disrespectful to hate grown-up people. "When her dear papa, Captain Crewe, brought her from India and gave her into my care," the speech proceeded, "he said to me in a jesting way, 'I am afraid she will be very rich, Miss Minchin.' My reply was, 'Her education at my seminary, Captain Crewe, shall be such as will adorn the largest fortune.' Sarah has become my most accomplished pupil. Her French and her dancing are a credit to the seminary. Her manners, which have caused you to call her Princess Sarah, are perfect. Her amiability she exhibits by giving you this afternoon's party. I hope you appreciate her generosity. I wish you to express your appreciation of it by saying aloud altogether, 'Thank you, Sarah.'" The entire schoolroom rose to its feet as it had done the morning Sarah remembered so well. "Thank you, Sarah," it said, and it must be confessed that Lottie jumped up and down. Sarah looked rather shy for a moment. She made a curtsy. It was a very nice one. "Thank you," she said, "for coming to my party." "Very pretty indeed, Sarah," approved Miss Minchin. "That is what a real princess does when the populace applauds her. Lavinia," scathingly, "the sound you just made was extremely like a snort. If you are jealous of your fellow pupil, I beg you will express your feelings in some more ladylike manner. Now I will leave you to enjoy yourselves." The instant she had swept out of the room, the spell her presence had always had upon them was broken. The door had scarcely closed before every seat was empty. The little girls jumped or tumbled out of theirs. The older ones wasted no time in deserting theirs. There was a rush toward the boxes. Sarah had bent over one of them with a delighted face. "These are books, I know," she said. The little children broke into a rueful murmur, and Ermengarde looked aghast. "Does your papa send you books for a birthday present?" she exclaimed. "Why, he's as bad as mine. Don't open them, Sarah." "I like them," Sarah laughed, but she turned to the biggest box. When she took out the last doll, it was so magnificent that the children uttered delighted groans of joy and actually drew back to gaze at it in breathless rapture. "She's almost as big as Lottie," someone gasped. Lottie clapped her hands and danced about, giggling. "She's dressed for the theatre," said Lavinia. "Her cloak is lined with ermine." "Oh!" cried Ermengarde, darting forward. "She has an opera glass in her hand, a blue and gold one." "Here is her trunk," said Sarah. "Let's open it and look at her things." She sat down upon the floor and turned the key. The children crowded, clamouring around her as she lifted tray after tray and revealed their contents. Never had the schoolroom been in such an uproar. There were lace collars and silk stockings and handkerchiefs. There was a jewel case containing a necklace and a tiara which looked quite as if they were made of real diamonds. There was a long sealskin and muff. That's like a neck wrap and a thing to keep your hands warm. There were ball dresses and walking dresses and visiting dresses. There were hats and tea gowns and fans. Even Lavinia and Jessie forgot that they were too elderly to care for dolls and uttered exclamations of delight and caught up things to look at them. "Suppose," Sarah said as she stood by the table, putting a large black velvet hat on the impassively smiling owner of all these splendours, that's the doll, "suppose she understands human talk and feels proud of being admired." "You are always supposing things," said Lavinia, and her air was very superior. That was the way she spoke. Hang on, I'm just trying to plug my phone in again so it doesn't go flat. "I know I am," answered Sarah undisturbedly. "I like it. There is nothing so nice as supposing. It's almost like being a fairy. If you suppose anything hard enough, it seems as if it were real." "It's all very well to suppose things if you have everything," said Lavinia. "Could you suppose and pretend if you were a beggar and lived in a garret?" Sarah stopped arranging the last doll's ostrich plumes and looked thoughtful. "I believe I could," she said. "If one was a beggar, one would have to suppose and pretend all the time. But it mightn't be easy." She often thought afterward how strange it was that just as she had finished saying this, just at that very moment, Miss Amelia came into the room. "Sarah," she said, "your papa's solicitor, Mr. Barrow, has called to see Miss Minchin, and as she must talk to him alone, and the refreshments are laid in her parlour, you had all better come and have your feast now, so that my sister can have her interview here in the schoolroom." Refreshments were not likely to be disdained at any hour, and many pairs of eyes gleamed. Miss Amelia arranged the procession into decorum, and then, with Sarah at her side heading it, she led the way, leaving the last doll sitting upon a chair with the glories of her wardrobe scattered about her, dresses and coats hung upon chair backs, piles of lace-frilled petticoats lying upon their seats. Becky, who was not expected to partake of refreshments, had the indiscretion to linger a moment to look at these beauties. It really was an indiscretion. "Go back to your work, Becky," Miss Amelia had said, but she had stopped to reverently pick up first a muff and then a coat, and while she stood looking at them adoringly, she heard Miss Minchin upon the threshold, and being smitten with terror at the thought of being accused of taking liberties, she rashly darted under the table, which hid her by its tablecloth. Miss Minchin came into the room, accompanied by a sharp-featured, dry little gentleman, who looked rather disturbed. Miss Minchin herself also looked rather disturbed, it must be admitted, and she gazed at the dry little gentleman with an irritated and puzzled expression. She sat down with stiff dignity and waved him to a chair. "Pray be seated, Mr. Barrow," she said. Mr. Barrow did not sit down at once. His attention seemed attracted by the last doll, and the things which surrounded her. He settled his eyeglasses and looked at them in nervous disapproval. The last doll herself did not seem to mind this in the least. She merely sat upright and returned his gaze indifferently. £100, Mr. Barrow remarked succinctly, all expensive material and made at a Parisian modiste's, that's a dressmaker's. He spent money lavishly enough, that young man. Miss Minchin felt offended. This seemed to be a disparagement of her best patron, and was a liberty. Even solicitors had no right to take liberties. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Barrow," she said stiffly. "I do not understand." "Birthday presents," said Mr. Barrow in the same critical manner, "to a child 11 years old. Mad extravagance, I call it." Miss Minchin drew herself up still more rigidly. "Captain Crewe is a man of fortune," she said. "The diamond mines alone—" Mr. Barrow wheeled around upon her. "Diamond mines," he broke out. "There are none. Never were." Miss Minchin actually got up, from her chair. "What?" she cried. "What do you mean?" "At any rate," answered Mr. Barrow quite snappishly, "it would have been much better if there never had been any." "Any diamond mines?" ejaculated Miss Minchin, catching at the back of a chair and feeling as if a splendid dream was fading away from her. "Diamond mines spell ruin oftener than they spell wealth," said Mr. Barrow. "When a man is in the hands of a very dear friend and is not a businessman himself, he had better steer clear of the dear friend's diamond mines or gold mines, or any other kind of mines dear friends want his money put into. The late Captain Crewe—" Here Miss Minchin stopped him with a gasp. "The late Captain Crewe!" she cried out. "The late! You don't come here to tell me that Captain Crewe is—" "He's dead, ma'am," Mr. Barrow answered with jerky briskness. "Died of jungle fever and business troubles combined. The jungle fever might not have killed him if he had not been driven mad by the business troubles. And the business troubles might not have put an end to him if the jungle fever had not assisted. Captain Crewe is dead." Miss Minchin dropped into her chair again. The words he had spoken filled her with alarm. "What were his business troubles?" she said. "What were they?" "Diamond mines," answered Mr. Barrow, "and dear friends." "And ruin." Miss Minchin lost her breath. "Ruin!" she gasped out. "Lost every penny. That young man had too much money. The dear friend was mad on the subject of the diamond mine. He put all his own money into it and all Captain Crewe's. Then the dear friend ran away. Captain Crewe was already stricken with fever when the news came. The shock was too much for him. He died delirious, raving about his little girl, and didn't leave a penny." Oh, this is not good. Now Miss Minchin understood, and never had she received such a blow in her life. Her show pupil, her show patron, swept away from the select seminary at one blow. She felt as if she had been outraged and robbed, and that Captain Crewe and Sarah and Mr. Barrow were equally to blame. "Do you mean to tell me," she cried out, "that he left nothing, that Sarah will have no fortune, that the child is a beggar, that she has left on my hands a little pauper instead of an heiress?" Mr. Barrow was a shrewd businessman and felt it was as well to make his own freedom from responsibility quite clear without any delay. "She is certainly left a beggar," he replied, "and she is certainly left on your hands, ma'am, as she hasn't a relation in the world that we know of." Miss Minchin started forward. She looked as if she were going to open the door and rush out of the room to stop the festivities going on joyfully and rather noisily that moment over the refreshments. "It is monstrous," she said. "She's in my sitting room at this moment, dressed in silk gauze and lace petticoats, giving a party at my expense." "She's giving it at your expense, ma'am, if she's giving it," said Mr. Barrow calmly. "Barrow and Skipworth are not responsible for anything. There never was a cleaner sweep made of a man's fortune. Captain Crewe died without paying our last bill, and it was a big one." Miss Minchin turned back from the door in increased indignation. This was worse than anyone could have dreamed of its being. "That is what has happened to me," she cried. "I was always so sure of his payments that I went to all sorts of ridiculous expenses for the child. I paid the bills for that ridiculous doll and her ridiculous fantastic wardrobe. The child was to have anything she wanted. She has a carriage and a pony and a maid, and I've paid for all of them since the last cheque came." Mr. Barrow evidently did not intend to remain to listen to the story of Miss Minchin's grievances after he had made the position of his firm clear and related the mere dry facts. He did not feel any particular sympathy for irate keepers of boarding schools. "You had better not pay for anything more, ma'am," he remarked, "unless you want to make presents to the young lady. No one will remember you. She hasn't a brass farthing to call her own." "But what am I to do?" demanded Miss Minchin, as if she felt it entirely his duty to make the matter right. "What am I to do?" "There isn't anything to do," said Mr. Barrow, folding up his eyeglasses and slipping them into his pocket. "Captain Crewe is dead. The child is left a pauper. Nobody is responsible for her but you." "I am not responsible for her, and I refuse to be made responsible." Miss Minchin became quite white with rage. Mr. Barrow turned to go. "I have nothing to do with that, madam," he said uninterestedly. "Barrow and Skipworth are not responsible. Very sorry the thing has happened, of course. If you think she is to be foisted off on me—" "You are greatly mistaken," Miss Minchin gasped. "I have been robbed and cheated. I will turn her into the street." If she had not been so furious, she would have been too discreet to say quite so much. She saw herself burdened with an extravagantly brought-up child whom she had always resented, and she lost all self-control. Mr. Barrow undisturbedly moved towards the door. "I wouldn't do that, madam," he commented. "It wouldn't look too well. Unpleasant story to get about in connection with the establishment. Pupil bundled out penniless and without friends." He was a clever businessman, and he knew what he was saying. He also knew that Miss Minchin was a businesswoman and would be shrewd enough to see the truth. She could not afford to do a thing which would make people speak of her as cruel and hard-hearted. "Better keep her and make use of her," he added. "She's a clever child, I believe. You can get a good deal out of her as she grows older." "I will get a good deal out of her before she grows older, exclaimed Miss Minchin. "I am sure you will, madam," said Mr. Barrow with a little sinister smile. "I am sure you will. Good morning." He bowed himself out and closed the door. It must be confessed that Miss Minchin stood for a few moments and glared at it. What he had said was quite true. She knew it. She had absolutely no redress. Her show pupil had melted into nothingness, leaving only a friendless, beggared little girl. Such money as she herself had advanced was lost and could not be regained. And as she stood there breathless under her sense of injury, there fell upon her ears a burst of gay voices from her own sacred room, which had actually been given up to the feast. She could at least stop this. But as she started toward the door, it was opened by Miss Amelia, who, when she caught sight of the changed, angry face, fell back a step in alarm. "What is the matter, sister?" she ejaculated. Miss Minchin's voice was almost fierce when she answered, "Where is Sarah Crewe?" Miss Amelia was bewildered. "Sarah?" she stammered. "Why, she's with the children in your room, of course. Has she a black frock in her sumptuous wardrobe?" In bitter irony. "A black frock?" Miss Amelia stammered again. A black one? She has frocks of every other colour. Has she a black one?" Miss Amelia began to turn pale. "No, yes," she said, "but it's too short for her. She has only the old black velvet, and she has outgrown it." "Go and tell her to take off that preposterous pink silk gauze and put the black one on, whether it's too short or not. She has done with finery." And then Miss Amelia began to wring her fat hands and cry. "Oh, sister," she sniffed. "Oh, sister, what can have happened?" Miss Minchin wasted no words. "Captain Crewe is dead," she said. "He has died without a penny. That spoiled, pampered, fanciful child is left a pauper on my hands." Miss Amelia sat down quite heavily in the nearest chair. "Hundreds of pounds I have spent on nonsense for her, and I shall never see a penny of it. Put a stop to this ridiculous party of hers. Go and make her change her frock at once." "I?" panted Miss Amelia. "Must I go and tell her now?" "This moment," was the fierce answer. "Don't sit staring like a goose. Go." Poor Miss Amelia was accustomed to being called a goose. She knew, in fact, that she was rather a goose, and it was left to geese to do a great many disagreeable things. It was a somewhat embarrassing thing to go into the midst of a room full of delighted children and tell the giver of the feast that she had suddenly been transformed into a little beggar and must go upstairs and put on an old black frock which was too small for her. But the thing must be done. This was evidently not the time when questions might be asked. She rubbed her eyes with her handkerchief until they looked quite red, after which she got up and went out of the room without venturing to say another word. When her older sister looked and spoke as she had done just now — this is Miss Amelia we're talking about, and Miss Minchin — The wisest course to pursue was to obey orders without any comment. Miss Minchin walked across the room. She spoke to herself aloud without knowing that she was doing it. During the last year, the story of the diamond mines had suggested all sorts of possibilities to her. Even proprietors of seminaries might make fortunes in stocks with the aid of owners of mines, and now, instead of looking forward to gains, she was left to look back upon losses. "The Princess Sarah, indeed," she said. "The child has been pampered as if she were a queen." She was sweeping angrily past the corner table as she said it, and the next moment she started at the sound of a loud, sobbing sniff, which issued from under the cover. "What is that?" she exclaimed angrily. The loud, sobbing sniff was heard again, and she stooped and raised the hanging folds of the table cover. "How dare you?" she cried out. "How dare you? Come out immediately." It was poor Becky who crawled out, and her cap was knocked on one side, and her face was red with repressed crying. "If you please, it's me, she explained. "I know I hadn't ought to, but I was looking at the doll, and I was frightened when you come in and slipped under the table." "You have been there all the time listening," said Miss Minchin. "No, Becky protested, bobbing curtsies. "Not listening. I thought I could slip out without you noticing, but I couldn't, and I had to stay. But I didn't listen, I wouldn't for nothing, but I couldn't help hearing." Suddenly it seemed almost as if she lost all fear of the awful lady before her. She burst into fresh tears. "Oh, please, she said, "I dare say you'll give me a warning, but I'm so sorry for poor Miss Sarah. I'm so sorry." "Leave the room," ordered Miss Minchin. Becky curtsied again, the tears openly streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, I will, she said, trembling. "But I just wanted to ask you, Miss Sarah, she's been such a rich young lady, and she's been waited on, hand and foot, and what will she do now, not without no maid? Please, would you let me wait on her after I've done me pots and kettles? I'd do him that quick if you'd let me wait on her now she's poor." "Oh," breaking out afresh, "poor little Miss Sarah, that was called a princess." Somehow she made Miss Minchin feel more angry than ever. The very scullery maid should range herself on the side of this child, whom she realized more fully than ever that she had never liked, was too much. She actually stamped her foot. "No, certainly not," she said. "She will wait on herself and on other people too. Leave the room this instant, or you'll leave your place." That means lose her job. Becky threw her apron over her head and fled. She ran out of the room and down the steps into the scullery, and there she sat down among her pots and kettles and wept as if her heart would break. "It's exactly like the ones in the stories," she wailed. "Them poor princesses, ones that was drove into the world." Miss Minchin had never looked quite so still and hard as she did when Sarah came to her a few hours later in response to a message she had sent her. Even by that time it seemed to Sarah as if the birthday party had either been a dream or a thing which had happened years ago and had happened in the life of quite another girl. Every sign of the festivities had been swept away. The holly had been removed from the schoolroom walls and the forms and desks put back into their places. Miss Minchin's sitting room looked as it always did. All traces of the feast had gone, and Miss Minchin had resumed her usual dress. The pupils had been ordered to lay aside their party frocks, and this having been done, they had returned to the schoolroom and huddled together in groups, whispering and talking excitedly. "Tell Sarah to come to my room," Miss Minchin had said to her sister, "and explain to her clearly that I will have no crying or unpleasant scenes." "Sister," replied Miss Amelia, "she is the strangest child I ever saw. She has actually made no fuss at all. You remember she made none when Captain Crewe went back to India. When I told her what had happened, she just stood quite still and looked at me without making a sound. Her eyes seemed to get bigger and bigger, and she went quite pale. When I had finished, she still stood staring for a few seconds, and then her chin began to shake, and she turned round and ran out of the room and upstairs. Several of the other children began to cry, but she did not seem to hear them, or to be alive to anything but just what I was saying. It made me feel quite queer not to be answered, and then you tell anything sudden, and when you tell anything sudden and strange, you expect people will say something, whatever it is. Nobody but Sarah herself knew what had happened in her room after she had run upstairs and locked her door. In fact, she herself scarcely remembered anything, but that she walked up and down saying over and over again to herself in a voice which did not seem her own, "My papa is dead. My papa is dead." Once she stopped before Emily, who sat watching her from her chair, and cried out wildly, "Emily, do you hear? Papa is dead. He is dead in India, thousands of miles away." When she came into Miss Minchin's sitting room and answered to her summons, her face was white, and her eyes had dark rings around them. Her mouth was set as if she did not wish it to reveal what she had suffered and was suffering. She did not look in the least like the rose-coloured butterfly child who had flown about from one of her treasures to another in the decorated schoolroom. She looked instead a strange, desolate, almost grotesque little figure. She had put on, without Mariette's help, the cast-aside black velvet frock. It was too short and tight, and her slender legs looked long and thin, showing themselves from beneath the brief skirt. As she had not found a piece of black ribbon, her short, thick black hair tumbled loosely about her face and contrasted strongly with its pallor. That means she had a very pale face. She held Emily tightly in one arm, and Emily was swathed in a piece of black material. "Put your doll down," said Miss Minchin. "What do you mean by bringing her here?" "No," Sarah answered, "I will not put her down. She is all I have. My papa gave her to me." She had always made Miss Minchin feel secretly uncomfortable, and she did so now. She did not speak with rudeness so much as with a cold steadiness, with which Miss Minchin felt it difficult to cope, perhaps because she knew she was doing a heartless and inhumane thing. "You will have no time for dolls in the future," she said. "You will have to work and improve yourself and make yourself useful." Sarah kept her big, strange eyes fixed on her and said not a word. "Everything will be different now." Miss Minchin went on. "I suppose Miss Amelia has explained matters to you?" "Yes," answered Sarah. "My papa is dead. He left me no money. I am quite poor." "You are a beggar," said Miss Minchin, her temper rising at the recollection of what all this meant. "It appears that you have no relations and no home and no one to take care of you." For a moment the thin, pale little face twitched, but Sarah again said nothing. "What are you staring at?" demanded Miss Minchin sharply. "Are you so stupid that you cannot understand? I tell you that you are quite alone in the world and have no one to do anything for you unless I choose to keep you here out of charity." "I understand," answered Sarah in a low tone, and there was a sound as if she had gulped down something which rose in her throat. "I understand." "That doll," cried Miss Minchin, pointing to the splendid birthday gift seated near. "That ridiculous doll with all her nonsensical, extravagant things. I actually paid the bill for her." Sarah turned her head toward the chair. "The last doll," she said. "The last doll," and her little mournful voice had an odd sound. "The last doll indeed," said Miss Minchin, "and she is mine, not yours. Everything you own is mine." "Please take it away from me then," said Sarah. "I do not want it." If she had cried and sobbed and seemed frightened, Miss Minchin might almost have had more patience with her. She was a woman who liked to domineer and feel her power, and as she looked at Sarah's pale little steadfast face and heard her proud little voice, she quite felt as if her might was being set at naught. "Don't put on grand airs," she said. "The time for that sort of thing is past. You are not a princess any longer. Your carriage and your pony will be sent away, and your maid will be dismissed. You will wear your oldest and plainest clothes. Your extravagant ones are no longer suited to your station. You are like Becky. You must work for your living." To her surprise, a faint gleam of light came into the child's eyes, a shade of relief. "Can I work?" she said. "If I can work, it will not matter so much. What can I do?" "You can do anything you are told," was the answer. "You are a sharp child and pick up things readily. If you make yourself useful, I may let you stay here. You speak French well, and you can help with the younger children." "May I?" exclaimed Sarah. "Oh, please let me. I know I can teach them. I like them and they like me." "Don't talk nonsense about people liking you," said Miss Minchin. "You will have to do more than teach the little ones. You will run errands and help in the kitchen as well as in the schoolroom. If you do not please me, you will be sent away. Remember that. Now go." Sarah stood still just a moment, looking at her. In her young soul she was thinking deep and strange things. Then she turned to leave the room. "Stop," said Miss Minchin. "Don't you intend to thank me?" Sarah paused, and all the deep, strange thoughts surged up in her breast. "What for?" she said. "For my kindness to you," replied Miss Minchin. "For my kindness in giving you a home." Sarah made 2 or 3 steps toward her. Her thin little chest heaved up and down, and she spoke in a strange, unchildishly fierce way. "You are not kind," she said. "You are not kind, and it is not a home." And she turned and ran out of the room before Miss Minchin could stop her or do anything but stare after her in stony anger. She went up the stairs slowly, but panting for breath, and she held Emily tight against her side. "I wish she could talk," she said to herself. "If she could speak, if she could speak." She meant to go to her room and lie down on the tiger skin with her cheek upon the great cat's head and look into the fire and think and think and think. But just before she reached the landing, Miss Amelia came out of the door and closed it behind her, and stood before it looking nervous and awkward. The truth was that she felt secretly ashamed of the thing she had been ordered to do. You are not to go in there," she said. "Not go in?" exclaimed Sarah, and she fell back a pace. "That is not your room now," Miss Amelia answered, reddening a little. Somehow, all at once, Sarah understood. She realized that this was the beginning of the change Miss Minchin had spoken of. "Where is my room?" she asked, hoping very much that her voice did not shake. "You are to sleep in the attic next to Becky." Sarah knew where it was. Becky had told her about it. She turned and mounted up 2 flights of stairs. The last one was narrow and covered with shabby strips of old carpet. She felt as if she were walking away and leaving far behind her the world in which that other child, who no longer seemed herself, had lived. This child, in her short, tight, old frock, climbed the stairs to the attic, was quite a different creature. When she reached the attic door and opened it, her heart gave a dreary little thump. Then she shut the door and stood against it and looked about her. Yes, this was another world. The room had a slanted roof and was whitewashed. The whitewash was dingy and had fallen off in places. There was a rusty grate, an old iron bedstead, that's the frame of a bed, and a hard bed covered with a faded coverlet. Some pieces of furniture too much worn to be used downstairs had been sent up. Under the skylight in the roof, which showed nothing but an oblong piece of dull grey sky, there stood an old battered red footstool. Sarah went to it and sat down. She seldom cried. She did not cry now. She laid Emily across her knees and put her face down upon her, and her arms round her, and sat there, her little black head resting on the black draperies, not saying one word, not making one sound. And as she sat in this silence, there came a low tap at the door, such a low, humble one, that she did not at first hear it, and indeed was not roused until the door was timidly pushed open, and a poor tear-smeared face appeared, peeping round it. It was Becky's face, and Becky had been crying furtively, that's secretively, for hours, and rubbing her eyes with her kitchen apron until she looked strange indeed. "Oh, miss," she said under her breath, would you allow me just to come in?" Sarah lifted her head and looked at her. She tried to begin a smile, and somehow she could not. Suddenly, and it was all through the loving mournfulness of Becky's streaming eyes, her face looked more like a child's. Not so much too old for her years. She held out her hand and gave a little sob. "Oh, Becky," she said, "I told you we were just the same, only two little girls, just two little girls. You see how true it is. There's no difference now. I'm not a princess any more." Becky ran to her and caught her hand and hugged it to her breast, kneeling beside her and sobbing with love and pain. "Yes, miss, you are," she cried, and her words were all broken. "Whatsever happens to you, whatsever, you'd be a princess all the same, and nothing couldn't make you nothing different." And that's the end of chapter 7, and we're going to finish there. That's the start of a new life for Sarah, isn't it? What a shocking thing to have happen. Oh my goodness. How's she going to survive? I think it's going to be some pretty hard work, because Miss Minchin isn't going to be nice to her, is she? Miss Minchin is going to make her pay for it in Miss Minchin's mind, because she feels like she has been cheated. Not that she has actually, but still. It's funny how some people get an idea stuck in their heads like that. Oh dear. We shall have to keep reading, not today, but we shall have to keep reading to find out what happens next. And if you know the story, don't tell us. We want to find out by listening, but you can anticipate it anyway. Anyway, thank you for joining me and listening to A Little Princess, and we will see you next time, which for me will be on Wednesday, because today's Monday here in New Zealand. Bye. Don't forget to drink lots of water and look after yourself and others.